nothing that has really happened has surprised me. There was always going to be a standoff of sorts on the devolution of policing and justice, not in principle, because the DUP accepts the principle, indeed has advocated it, but on timing, and given the swirling pressures around unionism at the present time, that was always going to be tricky. And you could see that, as it were, looking ahead, just as we can now see it with hindsight. But it is essential that it happens, because Republicans bought into this agreement and signed up for something that nobody thought historically they would do, namely support for the rule of law and policing, on the basis that control would be decentralized to Northern Ireland, so that the Northern Ireland Executive and the Assembly would ultimately be able to hold accountable the system of justice and the system of policing. So it's not surprising that it's hit a few bumps on the way, but I'm very clear that it needs to be accomplished as soon as possible. Well, we're in one of those typical Northern Ireland corners, but there is always a way out, and I think one will be found. One needs to be found, because the future stability of the process, and indeed the future stability of the democratic political settlement that was signed off and entered into in May 2007, depends upon justice and policing being devolved. And the dissidents, for example, will have absolutely no excuse, not that they have one now, isolated and marginalized and small, albeit dangerous though they are. They will have no excuse at all to seek to attack a police force that is under the democratic control of their own Northern Ireland Executive and elected Assembly. So this is an important milestone that does need to be secured. Well, one of the lessons is that you move forward step by step. Devolution is a new baby. It's just in the last 10 years learned how to walk and to start to stride forward more confidently. And I think that patience is needed. It's a learning process. Establishing a democratic political culture within Wales has been successful, but it's had its bumps, without all the history of conflict and division and bitterness that has dogged Northern Ireland for centuries. So I think that Northern Ireland needs to reflect on the Welsh experience. But of course, what I did do in 2006 as Secretary of State for Wales, whilst I was also Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, is bring in new legislation which provided for enhanced powers with Westminster still sovereign in these matters, a streamlined process that enabled lots more powers to be devolved much more quickly than was possible under the old primary system of primary legislation. In fact, it was by orders in council, more or less, which is borrowed from the Northern Ireland model. And that is working successfully. Many, many more powers in the last couple of years have been devolved than wherever possible under the old system. But also in that legislation, I provided for a referendum to go to full lawmaking powers that Scotland has and that Northern Ireland more or less enjoys. So Wales still has some catching up to do, but you say there's a breaking story about this. There is a report due in the middle of next month from Sir Emyr Jones's convention. He was the former United Nations ambassador for Britain. And that report obviously will have to be studied. But there isn't, in my view, a consensus sufficient to win a referendum at this stage, nor do I think there will be for the next year or two. Well, it's been quite innovative in coming forward with new policies. In the end, devolution's not some kind of abstract constitutional structure beloved of politicians like those of us who are politicians. It's there for a purpose. It's there to bring decision-making closer to the people and to make for better decision-making and to allow for tailor-made policies for a tailor-made situation. And so, for example, Wales pioneered free bus passes for pensioners and disabled people. It pioneered a children's commissioner, an older persons commissioner, and a number of other policy initiatives that would not have happened had power not been devolved. And they're starting to make a real difference. I mean, free bus travel, which I then brought in Northern Ireland, when I was Secretary of State, it was phased in, has liberated senior citizens who don't have a car, as many don't in Wales, because it's still relatively a low income area, has liberated them and transformed their lifestyles. And that has been picked up and carried across not just in Northern Ireland, but in Great Britain as well. And so Wales, I think, has begun to prove its worth, but also in a much more fundamental way, the Assembly vote, the referendum vote in September 1997 was won by a hair's breadth.
4,000 votes.
Indeed, and I was involved in that campaign, the Yes campaign, and set it up and organised it. It was very tough. If you had a referendum now on the Assembly, whether it should stay or go, it would be overwhelmingly won. So the devolution principle has been won in Wales. The next stage is, when do we move to lawmaking, full lawmaking powers? For me, that's not a great priority, though it's a principle I've always supported.